I do get some comments, by the way, pretty recently from some of the people whom I know actually, and there are those also whom I'm not too sure because they don't want to reveal their true identities. So it's very time consuming, at least for me, to verify the identity, the authenticity of the owner of the account. So might as well not put in too much of my time with those things. But I do get a comment from time to time from people I've met or I know. Like, for example, a recent one about the Vampire Saver video that I just uploaded. And the person is actually from China, and he is telling me some stuff about the video game industry, particularly fighting games. And it's really interesting that there are people who are into these things as well, because we know that there are so many people who are into video games, yes, but they aren't really programmers. Although they love games and so they play a lot of games and they have a lot of comments about video games. But it's really also good to have people who have some kind of formal training or have been programming, so they have a way to analyze fighting games, for example, that might not be quite like what the other folks who don't have that type of training, IT training or something like that. Now, in this case, our friend is telling us that the Vampire Saver game actually inspired a number of games such as Guilty Gear and Dragon Ball Fighter Z. And he says that it's because their style, these relatively new games or newer games, are similar to the Vampire Saver game. Also, he says that the level of development required to come up with something like a Vampire Saver game at the time was really out of this world. What I mean by that is actually his phrase is hell level, which means that the pressure, the stress that a developer would have to endure to be able to create something like Vampire Server is really incredible. Now, he also says that Dragon Ball Fighter Z uses Unreal Engine, specifically the Unreal Engine 4, and by programming this type of complicated or complex shaders, and as well as adjusting the pipeline, the rendering pipeline, they were able to realize a type of game that uses a style from 3D to 2D and is actually beyond perfect. So he's talking about the Dragon Ball Fighter Z because we know that recent technology, especially using the Unreal Engine, allows developers to use 3D to create 2D style of graphics. And it's interesting because if you have a way to create 3D models, for example, and then present them in a way that is 2D, then it makes development faster because if you think about it, if you are going to draw a character from many angles, from many camera angles, you would have to imagine, or if you have some kind of physical model, you would have to copy it many, many times. But if you have a 3D model of the object already and it's in your computer, you can rotate it and do something with it much faster, supposedly, because you already have the tools. You can convert the 3D object into a 2D photo, for example. And because of that, some of the angles that are difficult to draw by hand, even though you have something you can copy, become so much easier if you have a 3D model already that you can just rotate and move around using a computer. And that's what's incredible about the Dragon Ball Fighter Z using the Unreal Engine 4. Now, I do understand the concept because the reason why there is a shift from 2D to 3D, especially in animation, is precisely because there are certain angles that are difficult to draw. You need a model to know what it would really look like. Maybe you can imagine it. Some of the angles, there are artists who can really imagine very well what the drawing would look like. But for most cases, and for many people, it's difficult to imagine what the drawing would actually look like. So you need to have some kind of object, and if you can, for example, put it into the computer and rotate it very easily so that you can afterward take photos of the angles that you want, then it's going to be a lot faster in terms of the pipeline, the processing pipeline to do these things. Now, with regard to having done this myself, yes, I've done this. Actually, some of the earlier programs that I did made use of objects, 3D objects that I put into a computer program, and I could rotate it and play around with it so that I don't have to draw them myself. But at the time, I didn't yet have the functions to, for example, do shading or put in the colors that I wanted in a way that's so much faster. So what I did at the time was to create a 3D object and then take a photo of the angle of the 3D object that I want and then paint it, color it myself, and that's how I could make a drawing that has the texture or color that I want, because at the time it was so much faster to do that. Of course, later on, if you can put in more time and you will use that 3D model several times more, then it would be wise to apply the textures, apply the colors, apply the design style that you want on that object, and you can reuse it many times over. All right, so I think that should be enough. Thanks for joining me. We'll see each other soon.